Good afternoon, girls. For those who have not watched or not have listened to the video on photoperiodism, we will start with the new topic, which is called as photoperiodism. What is the meaning of this term, photoperiodism? Okay, so let us take a look at the meaning of the term photo, and let us see what does the word photo mean. Photo always stands for light. Periodism stands for the duration. Okay, so the meaning of the word photoperiodism is it stands for the response of the plants to the length of day and night. Okay, the response of the plant to the duration or length of day and night is known as photoperiodism. And because of this response, they are able to have changes. They change, and they can express this change in the form of many developmental processes. But the most prominent processes that you can see the effect of photoperiodism is in flowering. So every time you see a plant and it starts to flower, it means that photoperiodism has an effect on that plant. So before we go on, let me just explain to you certain terms. For example, the term that we are going to encounter in many of the in the notes ahead is the term photoperiod. This term photoperiod it stands for the length of day and night, which means in 24 hours of the day, part of the day will be when the sun rises up. Okay, so it could be you can have around 10 hours of day, and then the sun goes down, and then the night time, there is night, and that duration from the sunset onwards till the sunrise again, that means that dark period is also called as the night period, and it is the dark period, and let's say it is around 12 hours. Okay, so these the duration between the light and the dark are they can be relatively different from one day to the next. That means in one day, one of the days, the length could be 10 hours, or another day the daylight could be 12 hours of sunlight. So it can change in from one day to the next. But so before we go on to the next page, let me explain to you what does the photoperiodism, what kinds of what does it also affect in a plant. One of them, which is the most prominent, is definitely flowering. Flowering is one of the effects that we notice because of photoperiodism, but there are other processes which we can observe, and that is the dormancy of buds. Sometimes the flower buds will not open until a particular period has gone or passed. So that situation is called as a that condition is called as bud dormancy. Another one of the processes of that are affected by photoperiodism is bulb development. What is bulb formation? When the plant stores excess of its food, it will store it in the form of bulbs or tubers, which will be preserved. When unfavorable conditions arrive, the plant will be preserved with the help of bulbs, which is a form of vegetative propagation. So with this, I hope you've understood what is photoperiodism. So let us talk about the discovery. When was the phenomenon discovered? First of all, it was discovered by these two important scientists, Garner and Allard. And these two scientists, they worked on the Maryland mammoth variety of tobacco plant. And this variety, they found out that during the summer or the spring, what happens is they will not flower. This Maryland mammoth tobacco plant will not flower during the spring or the summer, but when they kept this Maryland mammoth plant in a box, and inside this box they allowed only a little bit of light to enter, and that means they could manipulate the amount of light which the plant could receive. So they realized that since this plant does not flower in spring, therefore it requires only when it has 14 hours or less than 14 hours of sunlight, then it could flower. So they said, since this plant does not flower in a very long duration of light amount, so therefore this plant is known as a short day plant. They named it as a short day plant. And from this particular plant, we come to know another important term, which is called as the critical photo period. Now, what do you mean by photo period or the critical photo period? Like I said here, we were talking about the Maryland mammoth species of tobacco. So this Maryland mammoth species of tobacco is not able to flower if you give it less than 14 hours if you give it more than 14 hours. That means in a day out of 24 hours, that means 14 hours of the day should be the daylight. Okay, and the rest should be 14 plus the rest should be 10 hours of night. Okay, so that duration of 14 hours of day and uh, 10 hours of night is for this plant. This is the critical photo period for this plant. So in other words, we can say that the amount or the length of day and night that is required for inducing flowering or for inducing the plant to flower is called as the critical. And so after we have learned what is critical photo period, then we must understand that there are three main plant categories based on the photo period. So I will show you in this video, in this next part. So let us look at this picture. In this picture you can see out of 24 hours there is a longer duration of light period as compared to the dark period. So on such days, these days are called as the long days. Okay, long days because the daylight amount or duration of daylight is very long as compared to the night period. When we look at these two plants in the bottom, do you see in this corner this plant is having a bunch of flowers, but the other plant does not show any flowering? So the first type of plant is called as a long day plant. Okay, and what does the long day plant like, or how does it get induced into flowering? If the plants which flowering of plants when they exceed their critical photoperiod is called as, sorry, let me just change that a bit. Plants which flower under long days are plants that can flower when they exceed their critical photoperiod. So let us look at this diagram here. So let us look at this. Long day plants, in this diagram you can see here, long day plants are plants which flower only when their photoperiod is more than their critical day length or their critical photoperiod. What does that mean? That means, for example, I take cabbage. Cabbage is a long day plant. If I take cabbage, okay, and this cabbage, suppose now it has a critical day length of, I'm just saying, approximately 14 hours of daylight and 10 hours of night. Okay, suppose now I have kept this cabbage in the sunlight for more than 14 hours. Suppose it exceeds 14 hours. Suppose I gave it 15 hours of daylight. Okay, so even when I give it more than the approximate amount of daylight which it requires, even then it will still flower, which means this plant enjoys the sunlight. That means it is a long day plant. Okay, so if this kind of flower, this kind of plant will not stop flowering even if you increase the amount of daylight. Okay, but what about short day plants? Let us take a look at the short days. Short day plant is a plant which when you give it when the photoperiod is less than the critical day length or it is equal to, then it will flower. Suppose now, for example, just for example, I'm giving you example of let's say this plant rice. Okay, for example, this is just for example. Suppose it requires a day length of 8 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of dark period. Okay, suppose this is the critical photoperiod or the critical day length of rice. Okay, suppose now in this particular day I I do not give it suppose I gave it probably just 7.5 hours uh, of of daylight and 12 hours of, or no, 13 12.5 hours of darkness. So I have given less than its critical day length, isn't it? Because I've given only 7.5. Still, this plant will flower, okay, because it does not require more than its critical day length. But if this plant, if I give it more than 8 hours, suppose I give 9 hours of daylight, what will happen to this plant, girls? The plant will start to decrease its frequency of flowering, which means it will not be so effective to give flowers because the day length has exceeded the critical photoperiod. So I hope you've understood these two important concepts. The concept that long day plants will flower when you have given them an extra amount or when they exceed their critical day length. But for short day plants, they will not flower only when you give less than or equal to their critical day length. Okay, so let us continue with this third part, which is the day neutral plants. These day neutral plants, if you look at the day neutral plants, these plants are not going to be affected by the photoperiod, which means if you give it a long day, if it's a short day, whatever amount of sunlight you give it, still this plant will flower. So those are the three types of flowers.